Donald J. Trump has begun a second term as President of the United States. What could that mean, and what might we expect in the next few years? Your host, Terry Wheeler, has some thoughts and observations. Now, Terry, set the stage for us. What issues do you see facing Mr. Trump right now?
Yeah, well, as we talked about before the election, I think I made this statement at one point that whoever wins might be sorry they won, simply because they're inheriting a mess. And it really didn't matter which side won. Things have there are some real challenges facing the United States. So one, the absolutely out of control government debt is going to have to be dealt with at some point. Whoever deals with it in a way that is best for America long term is going to be the villain short term. So if he and his administration does what is probably right for America over the long run, there is going to be some pain involved. And that pain keeps getting kicked down the road. Most recently, the government doesn't have a budget. They conveniently kicked it over to Donald Trump instead of the current administration dealing with it the way they should. He's going to have to deal with that at the same time of trying to tackle big problems. So he's coming into a mess. Trade deficits, inflation has been crazy over the last 4 years. Mass illegal immigration, crime has been, criminals are just feeling like they can do whatever they want. There's a lot of DEI backlash because you're seeing people in important positions that aren't able to perform the way they should. There's plenty of intelligent people that are of color that you should hire. Don't hire somebody just because they're of color. That doesn't make them good. So hire people based on the quality of and content of their character, not the color of their skin. And that's really the lesson that people are learning in a very painful way. And it's the backlash. It's a matter of what's going to happen next. There's also some positives that he is inheriting. So he is walking into some good things. What are those good things? Well, inflation last year was back to where we were targeting, meaning in the mid 2.5 range, roughly. Now, actual inflation is a little bit higher. They're manipulating, but it's not nearly as bad as the depending on what you're looking at, 8 to 20% inflation we saw the year before. They're not factoring in things like shrinkflation. So they'll talk about shrinkflation, but they've been ignoring it in the recent time because inflation has come down, but the size of our products are getting smaller and smaller, which is basically another form of inflation. So inflation is in a better spot right now than it was the prior 2 or 3 years, but it's still going to be a big challenge. Employment numbers, if you just glance at them, they're quite good. So regardless of what your point is about employment, you can find some nuggets that support your point of view, meaning people who think employment is great can point to headline numbers and you can say it's great. People who think it's not so great, they can point to the number of people that have 2 to 3 jobs, which inflates the employment numbers. But the reality is if one person has 3 jobs, that doesn't mean 3 people are working. So when you go deeper into the employment numbers, there's some things that are still concerning, but the headline numbers are pretty decent. And then there's no denying that Wall Street has been great for the past, not just 4 years, but the past, going on 14 years, 15 years. It's been almost as extensive, if not a more extensive bull market than we saw in the 90s. But remember how the 90s ended in early 2000, 2001. We saw tech stocks crash 80%. We saw the overall markets crash 50%. So pushing up the markets, again, at some point, prices have to be paid. The economy needs recessions. So I think the state that he's walking into, he has so many things he has to try to fix that is wrong with our government, our economy. Things are broken right now. And it's a matter of how do we fix them? The last administration is trying to fix some things. This administration needs to do what's right for America and not right for them. So we'll see what actually happens.
Well, taxes. Everybody always talks about taxes, but we have a bill that was supposed to sunset or end at the end of 2025. And it was originally written, supported by President Trump in his first term. Do you see that bill going away? What do you see happening with taxes?
Yes, I think the chances of that bill going away are very slim at this point, because again, the Republicans now have both the House and the Senate. Now, not huge margins, of course. So they've got to keep the party together, which historically they don't do so well. But the taxes are one thing they usually do rally around, and this should be extended at a minimum. The question is, do taxes go down in other areas, and do they do it in a way that's good for America? But I think the status quo, I would give it over an 80 to 90% chance that it's going to extend beyond 2026. But that's just Terry's point of view. We'll see what actually happens. But I think taxes, we're going to have more time to do tax planning and things at these pretty favorable tax brackets. So I think we have time now because of how the elections went on the tax front. How will that affect everything is where arguments can be had on both sides, meaning, is it better for people to pay less taxes and then to spend that money in consumption, which most of America does spend it, so that goes into the economy, versus does the government spending our money, is that a better way? And we're going to talk about Doge a little bit later. But most of us believe the government doesn't spend our money too well. So you can tell I'm in the camp for lower taxes.
Well, tariffs. Mr. Trump has made it very clear he is a proponent of tariffs. Pretty big ones, too, on some of our major trading partners.
Yeah. So here's where we gotta understand Trump a little bit. And if you've ever read his book, which I read it decades ago, The Art of the Deal, when you put out, statements that are going to cause headlines, which he is better than any president we've ever seen at doing that, he does that for negotiation. So some of the tariffs may actually take effect, and some of them should, on areas like China and people that have been cheating for years and things that we need for national defense. Like we're very, very at risk right now, and our government has been very irresponsible in the way they've handled our national security. That became very apparent during COVID when we could not even take care of ourselves without the help of China when it came to pharmaceutical drugs and things of that nature. AI is another area we're very much at risk of falling behind unless we can get other countries to give us what we need to build the proper AI chips and things. So will he do tariffs that protect our national security? I hope so. It is absolutely needed, in my opinion. I think the idea that we shouldn't have inflation at all cost is irresponsible and, to me, childish. You have to protect your national security. That's the primary role of the government, and they've let us down there. So some of these tariffs are going to need to go in place, and some of them are rhetoric to get trading partners to be a little more fair or to do what they're after. And you see that in Canada. In Canada, quite frankly, they're going to have a change in party because of Trump, and he's not even president yet, because they kind of went down the same path of being a little bit too soft, being a little bit too bleeding heart, and doing things that, quite frankly, were not good for Canada, and then trying to, they can't get in the ring with the United States. It's as simple as that. So Trump has made headlines for saying, well, maybe Canada should just be our 51st state. That's rhetoric. He's not going to take over Canada. He's not going to force them. If they ever wanted to join, of course, I think all of us would love to have Canada as a 51st state. But it's more rhetoric for trade. So I think you got to separate the rhetoric from the reality. But as you mentioned, some of these are real and they are going to be expensive. And when I say expensive, I mean, they're going to cause inflation. And some of it is necessary, in my opinion, but the necessary ones are going to cause us inflation potentially. Now, what do I mean by that? So the Trump administration will say, no, we're not going to have inflation not because tariffs aren't inflationary, but because the tariffs are only one piece of the puzzle. And they're going to reduce costs in other areas that will cause enough deflationary forces to offset any inflation caused by tariffs. So when done right, the tariffs can be great negotiating tools, which we saw the first round with Trump as president, and we're already seeing it the second round. So I think the tariffs, if used correctly, could be a good tool. Now, what if he uses them incorrectly? What if he just puts tariffs on because he's trying to isolate us? Well, if that goes too far, that's going to be inflationary. And it's also going to set us back, I think, as a country where, like it or not, we are a global economy. I think for the most part, a lot of us think that's a good thing. But you got to have a good balance of protecting your nation and being global. And the pendulum has swung too far toward globalism. And at least that's how America has voted. And that's how Canada's voting. And I think there were 60 some odd elections, and overwhelmingly the world is starting to vote that way. So the trend is moving. The fear is, what if that pendulum swings too far the other way? And now we have isolationism here and abroad. That can set us back, I think, as a world in ways that we don't want. So inflation would be one of the biggest things that would be the net effect if we become too isolated. But we do need to be a little bit more isolated and be able to self-rely on things of national security. And that's, if we went to war right now, we'd be in trouble. Let's just put it that way with China. So we need to be smarter about that and not let the next political cycle define what we do. And that's what's been happening. So some of these tariffs, I think, are needed.
Okay. You mentioned inflation. What do you see in the overall picture here?
So the tariffs, as I mentioned, are inflationary, but things that would be deflationary would be things like reducing or increasing our energy independence, which would decrease the cost of energy. Energy goes into virtually everything. So this one thing alone can more than offset tariffs very easily. So energy, the challenge with energy is we have this tug of war between those who want alternative energy sources because they want to protect the environment and the world. And these are globalist individuals typically. So the key is we need to start having adult conversations about this. And what I mean by adult conversations is quit thinking that wind solar is the answer and solar panels are the answer. That's going to take decades and decades and decades to do. So California, we have children running our politics. They talk about having everybody be on, we're doing away with gas powered vehicles in the next, I forget, I think it was 2030. So that will never happen.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's insanity. Like the grid can't handle what we do now. It definitely can't handle cars going on there. And those that have bought their Teslas, they love them. But boy, the nightmare stories about being stuck, having to charge for 3 hours because there's a line and everything else. The infrastructure simply is not there. So if we're going to really go over energy independence, we need to be realistic that we are going to have oil and gas for at least another couple of decades. So that's, if we can all agree on that, which any true scientist, not a hack, but a real scientist is going to tell you that's the case. So when you talk about energy independence, we are going to drill somewhere in the world. So are we doing anything for the environment by not drilling here and instead letting South America, who is a far, far dirtier process to the environment, drill, and letting the Middle East, which many areas of the Middle East are far worse than us? We're not doing anything for the environment. We're hurting the environment. So energy independence, if we can produce enough oil, stop letting the Middle East manipulate prices, which is exactly what they do. So if you feel like gas prices go up every year in July or June and July, right before everybody's going on vacation, it's true. It happens. They control the prices. They control the supply and demand. Supply and demand determines costs. So if we have more energy independence, we have more power as a country. We can bring down costs. And that will bring down the cost of almost everything you use day to day, because oil and energy products go into everything from plastics to the vehicles we drive to heating your house. Like we would not have a modern society without that. So energy independence is massively deflationary, and that could offset the inflation quite a bit. So the energy independence, the key is what's going to happen. I think one of the biggest travesties that isn't being reported on most of the mainstream media is that the Biden administration is doing everything it can to make it to where the new administration can't implement the actual set of policies that they ran on, that the vast majority, meaning the biggest majority we've seen in years from a presidential election, voted for. And they're trying to make a lot of things on the energy side harder to do. And they're proactively doing it, not legally, but through actions that will have to be litigated to slow down the process. So the current administration is a big part of the problem in this area. Canada was really pissed at us because we had this pipeline that then the Biden administration shut down. So all that money they spent to help work with us was wasted. That will go back in place, presumably, but can it all happen fast enough? to bring down the cost at the same pace that tariffs may inflate. And that's the question. But energy independence to me is a national security issue. I think it's something we've got to do. We just got to be smart about it. Okay. In the long-term picture, I think this administration, the high-ranking Democrats, high-profile Democrats, such as Bill Gates, they're all for smart ways to implement nuclear, which if we really ever want to be green, that's got to be part of the equation. We haven't heard a lot of talk about that from either side, but the Trump administration is very clearly pro-nuclear, but not all Republicans are. So can that get done? We'll see. But that in the long term, to really help the environment, that's got to be part of the solution. So I think if he does it well, energy independence can lead to meeting both goals. If he does it poorly and he just takes away all the regulation and lets people drill it however they want, the cheapest way they can, well, that's what occurs in other parts of the world. And that will not improve the environment. It will improve energy costs, but it won't improve the environment. But I think if he does it smart, he can do both. And he said he's going to, but we'll see what happens. All right.
Now, we don't have all week to talk about this, but the next hot button issue, immigration.
Yeah, immigration we could talk a week about. But to me, immigration is simple. And I think for Americans, it's pretty simple. Not for the politicians and definitely not for the way they talk about it on mainstream media. But we are a country of immigrants. Most people want immigration. They just want legal immigration. And they want it to be smart. Now, what is smart? Two intelligent minds can differ. So my version of smart is I think you need a healthy mix of talented individuals, meaning people that they have skills that we need, that we should allow them to come into our country because we need those resources. And then we should have people that are chasing the American dream that maybe are on the lowest of economic stratospheres, that they need to be a part of our economy because they are often the next generation of innovators, and they tend to do more than the Americans that are born here a lot of times, meaning they work their butts off. So the lazy Americans, some of them we can deport. I don't think that's legal under our Constitution. But we need a healthy mix, but it needs to be legal, and we need to have an actual border. So we need to have an actual country. So the key, we're seeing problems all around the world, and maybe for my own selfish reasons, I hope we don't become so globalist that France is no longer France, Germany is no longer Germany, Ireland is no longer Ireland. I mean, if we're all the same, that's pretty boring. Like, it's nice to have different cultures, and when you travel the world, you see different cultures and different ways of thinking. That makes us all better. The key is having those societies also be inclusive, but not overran, and not overran illegally. So that is definitely going to end. It's just a matter of how, and do they do it smart? So I do want to hit on deportations, because this is one of the biggest fear-mongering things that is going on. And to be honest, we don't know exactly what he's going to do. So is it going to be mass deportations? We have millions of illegal immigrants that have been living here for decades. There's got to be some intelligence that goes into this. Meaning those are people that are part of our fabric, and they're here implicitly legally. Now, meaning we need those workers for all kinds of things, because again, we do have a lot of lazy Americans that there'll be a job there and they would rather just collect and live off the system. Well, one, that needs to change. Make them get off their butts or let them live in the gutter. So what? If you don't get off your butt and work, why should we all support you? Now, there are a lot of people that want jobs and can't do it, or maybe they are a single mom that's lost her job and she has kids to take care of and can't give caregivers. We need a nice, good safety net, but it needs to be more smartly thought out now, where people can just live a life that they're comfortable with. So they're just going to make do by living off the rest of us. So the deportations, to me, there's got to be a line drawn somewhere in the sand that says, okay, if you've been here for X number of years, you're not going to be part of this at all. And we need to create a path, in my opinion. This is just Terry's opinion, but I think we should create a path to citizenship for those folks. Now, those folks, in my opinion, and again, this is just my opinion, so take it for what it's worth. The big argument between the Democrats and Republicans is that Republicans feel like the Democrats are trying to fix all future elections by letting all these illegals in because they do overwhelmingly vote Democrat. Well, that's a simple fix. Those that we want to keep here, just take away their ability to vote for the next 20 to 30 years. Don't let them vote. They're illegal. Why should they be able to vote? So just have a path that says you can become a citizen, but you don't get voting rights for 20 or 30 years. Guess what happens in 20 or 30 years? They become Americans. And once they really become Americans and they start starting businesses and they start experiencing the pros and cons of what it means when people take away your money and give it to others, they then start becoming a mix of Democrat and Republican, and it's not so one-sided. So there's fixes to that. But if you look at the Democrat side, they would be completely against that because their motivation is to buy the vote. And you look at the Republicans and you're going to have mixes, but the Republicans are being elected on let's get rid of all these illegals. So what's going to happen in reality? They're going to start with the criminals. They've said that pretty straightforward. So if you are an illegal immigrant and you're committing crimes, you're going to get deported. And I don't think too many people have too much of a problem with that. Are they going to be separated from their families and kids if they don't go with them? Yes, but we do that for Americans. Why should we do it any different for immigrants? So if I go to jail, I'm separated from my kids. You're an immigrant, you commit a crime, you're separated from your kids. So what? Don't commit crimes. So it's pretty simple. So we've lost in our system the criminal justice. Part of it is about having an incentive to not commit crimes because of what can happen to you if you do. That is where in criminal law, which I went to law school, criminal law, that's one of the four key things as to why we punish people. It's called deterrence. That has gone away. So now people will walk in and they'll grab something out of Walmart and just walk out and nobody will do a thing about it. It used to be that you could shoot them. Well, should we go back to shoot them? Maybe not. If you're at risk, by all means, you should be able to shoot the guy in the head if they're pulling a gun on you. But we are so out of whack where we are so worried about the criminal that we are putting everybody else at risk. So criminals, if you can't tell, if you're a criminal and you are an illegal immigrant, you're going to be deported. So just don't commit crimes. This is completely within your control. So the second thing would be those that are here just looking for a better life. That's where it pulls on your heartstrings a lot more because we want immigration. We want people to chase the American dream. We just prefer it's not illegal, and we prefer that our government isn't manipulating the borders and keeping them wide open while they act like they're not. And that's what's been going on. So we know people in Border Patrol. This is going on. So the key is they're now going to be empowered to actually enforce a border. The other thing the Biden administration was doing is trying to sell off all the metal so the wall can't be rebuilt. All they're doing is just making it more expensive. So this administration, the lame duck part of the administration is something that maybe we need to shorten the time between the old election and the new, because this is garbage what they're doing. And it's against what the American public voted for. So they're not representing the people. So the key here with immigration is we hope it's thoughtful, but let's say it's not. So if it's thoughtful, I think everybody's going to be fine with it. And I think it will be good for us if they have some way of deporting some, letting some stay. And the key is, how do they do that? Let's say it's rounding up people and deporting them, which is what, if you listen to some of the more liberal stations, that's the picture that they paint. Well, if that happens, if it's done very sloppy, and if it's done in a way in which we're going to see on the media every day, all the devastation that it's causing, one, I don't think it's going to happen that way. But if it does happen that way, that's going to really bring down the morale of people. It's going to, I think, cause the pendulum to swing the other direction, where maybe we let some of these crazy people run our country again. It's going to be bad for the future of the administration that's in place. So I don't think that's going to happen. But if it did happen, when you bring down the sentiment of the country and when people think the future isn't good, that will be very bad on your portfolio in the stock market, because that does reflect to spending and that will cause volatility. So if you think that's going to happen, make sure you get defense under your portfolio. I'm really hoping that the current administration that has nothing to lose meaning Trump. The party clearly has something to lose because they'll be around after Trump. But he has nothing to lose by trying to do right by America and proving everybody that are his naysayers wrong. He has nothing to lose. And if he does that, he could go down as one of the greatest presidents in history. He's already only one of two to ever be elected twice with a term in between. Mm-hmm. And there are some that will argue, and Facebook has now come out and admitted they manipulated the last election. They will argue that he actually should have won 3 elections. So he wouldn't have been in the third if he won the second. But the media was very, very manipulative last time. And I think that's going to change also, because I think there's a come to Jesus moment, so to speak, where everybody knows what they've been doing. It's all you have to do is open your eyes and look at real facts and then look at what they show on the TVs. And you'll see that the mainstream media is a mess. And that's Fox News also. So that's not just the liberal stations. That's both. They're tabloids.
Well, let's move on to one person who also is involved in the media, Mr. Elon Musk.
Yeah. Doge.
And Vivek Ramaswamy, who may not be in the media, but the two of them working together are supposed to slim down our government.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and they can. I mean, I could go in and slim down our government. You could go in and slim down our government. That's not a hard job. So Doge, first thing for Elon Musk, he's a very controversial individual. I think one thing the history books will reflect is he saved the First Amendment. So anybody who's a student of the First Amendment is absolutely just horrified by what's gone on the last 4 years and by what went on with the media. So the First Amendment, I think he's going to be credited with saving it because there was a counter force. I mean, who would have ever thought that a U.S. president would be kicked off of social media for garbage reasons? And that's what happened. So you can disagree with him. That doesn't mean you can silence him. So the First Amendment is being restored. And I think that he is an individual. He will be the single biggest person that will be credited for saving the First Amendment. So that's outside of Doge. So let's talk about Doge. So Doge, Department of Government Efficiency. I think I have that right.
Yes.
So you hear a lot of rhetoric out there. A lot of it is garbage where they think he's going to be a shadow president and all kinds of other things that, again, the mainstream media just tries to whip up a storm because they want eyeballs. But the key is Trump has run on, we are going to reduce the size of government. Elon Musk came in after the fact. So this is Trump's agenda, not Elon Musk's agenda. Elon Musk has a track record of doing this with publicly traded companies and doing it extremely effectively. So if you're not familiar with what happened with X, he got rid of a tremendous amount of people and didn't lose quality for very long at all. And he's grown that company. And he's done it because there's so many slouches that he had working for him that were doing things that didn't need to be done. Now that's a publicly traded company. Mm-hmm. Now let's look at the government. Well, my stepmother worked for the government and she would be the first to argue that we work our butts off. So it's not that all government employees don't work, but it's that there's so much repetition, so much waste, so much political handing out of money to people's friends that have control of the checkbook. There's a tremendous amount of waste that can be eliminated. That is, again, by anybody who's being realistic, that's a given. So will Doge be able to reduce the size of government? Yes. To what level? And will they go too far? That's where we have to, one, get excited about if they do it the right way and get worried if they go too far. So how much control does Elon Musk have? He's not elected. He only has as much control as Donald Trump allows him to have. And I don't think Elon Musk or anybody else is going to control Donald Trump. So I think ultimately Elon Musk is an incredibly maybe controversial individual, but he's one of the most intelligent human beings on the planet that we've seen in our time. Just look at what he's doing with SpaceX and some of the things he's been able to accomplish. It's hard to deny that. Even his haters, they may think he's a crazy genius, but he's clearly a genius. So will he and Vivek be able to clear some waste? I think yes. How much will they be able to get done? Will it be as extreme as Rebecca in particular ran on, we can get rid of 50% of the government. Will it be that extreme? I doubt it. I think Republicans benefit just like Democrats too much on these money handouts. So there's a reason you have politicians that had nothing when they came in and now they're worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. And it's not because of their salaries. So it's things like illegal stock trading, which if they did it, if we did what they do, we'd be in jail, but they get away with it. So ultimately, these handouts and things that are occurring to friends and buying of influence, if that is reduced, that will be massively deflationary. And again, that will more than offset tariffs, which will already have been offset by energy independence. So I think the Doge is a great idea that all Americans on both sides of the aisle have wanted for decades. It's just how successful will they do it? And can they do it thoughtfully and effectively without causing damage to national security and to other areas, resources that many people feel are important that maybe they don't feel are as important. So it's gonna be a mix of good and bad, I think.
All right. And then briefly, less regulation. How do you see that? Do you see that happening? And if so,
oh, absolutely.
Bad?
Yeah. The less regulation. So there's a tremendous amount of regulation that is in place that the U.S. Supreme Court. So remember, we have 3 branches of government. So you have the presidency, of course, you have Congress, and you have the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has already said that a lot of what the government has done is illegal because they do not have the power to do it. That case was settled last year, has nothing to do with Trump, but it is a massive case. Now, what that means is that a lot of these regulations that businesses have to live under on the federal government side, that maybe you have the Department of Energy set up all kinds of rules and regulations as to how you can do X, Y, Z. Well, they were never empowered to do that. There was a law that was general enough for them to say, hey, we can do this, and they have become our government. So when you talk about shadow government, the U.S. Supreme Court said this is no longer legal. This was never legal. You did it anyway, but this will take years to unwind. So the less regulation goes along with Doge as they go through and they cut a lot of these areas that they're not even legally doing anyway. You're going to see Congress either have to actually do its job. And if they want these things to be in place, they have to pass laws to put them in place, not let the shadow government do it, meaning the administrative state, which, by the way, is not a branch of government. They are going to have to actually do their jobs and pass the laws. So ultimately, less regulation is a given. It is absolutely going to happen. They're going to do a lot of it in the first 60 days. And then you're going to see that increase as time goes on. It's a matter of to what extent again. So the people that are worried about it are worried that they're going to get rid of programs that they like that maybe were never authorized in the first place. Well, I love constitutional law. I'm a little bit more of a hardliner there, where I think the Constitution should actually be followed. And I think that the government, meaning particularly Congress, they should pass the laws. I don't think some administrative state should be doing it. So to the degree that the elected officials of our country have to pass laws and do their job, and if they don't do it, people are going to be hurt, we'll place that blame on Congress because that's their job. So there are a variety of pretty major things. So I have mentioned, I think in a previous podcast, I probably spend over $50,000 a year complying with regulations, most of which are illegal. Now, should some of those regulations be there? I would submit, yeah, they should be there. But Congress has to pass those rules, and they have to make them clear, not give some unknown force and some bureaucrats the ability to crush your life simply because they're having a bad day. And that's how bad some of these regulations in California are. So there are problems that need to be fixed, and less regulation is probably one of the single biggest benefits we're going to get from this administration. And it will allow small businesses to actually compete with big business, because the regulations that are in place have made it so that small businesses cannot afford to comply. And therefore you see these companies that are mega, nobody can compete with them. They're the only ones that can comply. And oh, by the way, they own the politicians. So I think the less regulation is going to bring capitalism back to our country, which will spur growth. It just has to be done thoughtfully, because again, if they do it in a way that puts us at too much risk, then that's bad. So it's if you can't tell our key takeaways, so to speak, from this little talk. One, we don't know for sure exactly how this is all going to roll out. They can do it in a thoughtful, intelligent way, methodical, that can really bring our country back to be a stronger, safer country. So for those citizens that are here, it will be safe. For those that are not citizens, maybe they get a path because many of them have earned it to citizenship. And some of them do need to go, meaning opening up the floodgates. They all knew they were coming in illegally. Some of those people will go and it will be sad, but they knew what they were getting into, meaning it's not as if they didn't know exactly what they were doing when they crossed the borders illegally to take advantage of this. So it is still going to be heartbreaking. There'll be some bad pictures, but ultimately we need to have our own country. And I think you're going to see that around the world. Germany and other places are all having major problems. France, massive. Great Britain, massive. So you're going to see countries around the world try to have their countries back again. The hard part is you don't want the pendulum to swing the other way. So key takeaways in your portfolio, in your wealth management going forward, be ready for volatility. Be ready for some things that happen that maybe they do it wrong and maybe it causes negative effects. They're going to do some things that are going to be great that are going to cause positive effects. I don't think they're going to get it all right. I think we're going to have a mixed bag. Hopefully, as Americans, hopefully we can all get behind this current administration and what they do positively instead of just being on one team or the other, which is kind of what was happening in the election. Hopefully we can be Americans and we can actually try to get behind this president. And if Kamala Harris was president, I would be saying the same thing. We got to get behind them and hopefully they will do right by the country and not do self-serving things. And hopefully that pendulum of the self-serving society is moving. Ultimately, I think we are going in the right direction. I think the key is there's a lot of good things that the last party stood for that we don't want to throw the good things out with the bad things. And we're hoping Trump doesn't bring too many bad things with him because he has his warts too. So it's a matter of, I'm hoping he is so concerned with his legacy and his name that he will do what's right for America, because there's nothing that can cement his name in history books more than being a good president. Will he do that? I know that the country is relatively divided as to will that actually happen or not. Let's all hope that he is successful.
In 4 years, we can talk about it again.
Yeah, and really in 2 years, we'll be talking about it again.
This is true.
Which that'll start in a year.
That's right. That's right.
So, I mean, he is going to be held accountable by Congress, and he can only do so much without them. The hard part is if he does some things that are right long-term, it's going to cause pain to the Republican Party, which hurts their elections. So, unfortunately, I don't think the American public votes with a long-term horizon in mind. And that is why we are having so many problems as a country, is they're all just looking at their own personal pocketbook and they're all just looking at the short term, and that's how they're voting. American voters need to get smarter and they need to vote for the long term, because this is a country we're leaving to our kids. And if we keep screwing it up for our kids, they're probably going to have national security problems. They may not even have a country if we let this go too far. So we need to preserve our American way and values, which have values just like France. Like France is great to visit. They have their culture. We have our culture, and we need to have thoughtful policies that bring people in that want to be Americans, not people that don't want to be Americans. If you don't want to be an American, live somewhere else. So I think our key takeaways portfolio wise is be ready for volatility. We should have a recession during this presidency. It's long overdue. If he does what's right for the economy, he will let capitalism be capitalism, which means you're going to have a significant down market that will be in that 30 to 50% range, probably for the stock market. So prepare now. Don't wait till your portfolio is underwater.
Well, Terry, how can people reach you if they want to talk some more about this?
Sure. So normally in our meetings, we're not going to talk a lot about politics. So we have a lot of clients that are of both political persuasions. We have a lot of great talks. And my fear always with podcasts is it's kind of a one-sided conversation. But when you have a conversation and you talk about policies, I think most of us are in the middle, which is squarely where I stand. But if you want to talk about investments and portfolio management and all of that, we are reachable at www.weriaadvisors.com or at 916-325-0130. And of course, if you could subscribe to listen to our next podcast, they're going to be much more investment centric. In fact, I think the next one that we're going to do, there's a new Social Security Act that was just passed that affects a lot of people, especially here in California where I live. We have a lot of government workers that don't get Social Security because they are in what we called an opt-out state, and they're now going to get Social Security benefits. So that's one that we will probably be recording next Friday, and it'll be out soon. So that one is very timely. So subscribe and you'll get a notification. That's one you'll definitely want to listen to, especially if you or a loved one is affected by it. So thank you again for your time today, Patrice.
Thanks, Terry. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and, of course, share Terry's thoughts and insights with others. I'm Patrice Sikora, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you for listening to We Money Talk with Terry Wheeler. Be sure to click the follow button to be notified as new episodes become available. Information presented is for educational purposes only. No listener should assume that any discussions or information presented serves as the receipt of or substitute for personalized advice from We Alliance Wealth Advisors, Inc. or from any other investment professional and is not intended as an offer of solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. We Alliance Wealth Advisors, Inc. is not a law firm or accounting firm, and no portion of this podcast should be interpreted as legal, accounting, or tax advice. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not appropriate for every individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from qualified tax, legal, or investment advisors to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation.